Mr. Wolf.
Sure, this isn't Glenn Fine's fault. That's just a joke, and we're striking that from the record.
No, but I'll tell you, until
we're going to subpoena him and ask him to no. That's not for the record. That was just the. Let me ask you a couple questions,
sure,
since we do have a vote, and I will submit. On the gang issue, the committee plussed up the gang issue. Your National Gang Intelligence Centers determined that gangs are active in every state of the Union, and that 39 of the gangs have been identified as national threats. In 2008, 58% of the local law enforcement agencies reported criminal gangs were active in their jurisdictions, an almost 30% increase since 2004. The committee included a significant increase of $25 million above your request to specifically address this issue. Could you tell the committee how many Safe Street Task Force exists, how many additional agents and task force will be added as a result of the FY10 increase, and is this a top law enforcement priority?
Let me, excuse me just one sec. I needed to know the background from those who are more knowledgeable of the figures. Approximately $13 million is going to personnel, additional personnel. We do not intend at this juncture to establish new Safe Street Task Force, but to augment the Safe Street Task Forces we already have. As I mentioned before, and I can get you the statistics, we've doubled, if not tripled, the number of Safe Street Task Forces we put up in the last several years.
But is the money used in a way, because as you recall, there had been a request that maybe you use the same approach that was used during the 60s with regard to organized crime. It just becomes a major effort that you actually have someone in a bureau who is focusing like a laser beam, because if you live in a neighborhood that you're terrorized by gangs, you're in essence, that's a form of domestic terrorism that the people can't really live. And
we have certainly gang intelligence centers, we have gang task forces, but what we have come to understand is we need fusion centers focusing on particular gangs. And as I think you are aware, we have an MS-13, a specific MS-13 task force with persons operating not just in headquarters but in the various communities, yours, but Los Angeles, and as I indicated before, with associates I should say, adjunct task forces in places like El Salvador. And so we have focused on gangs in general, but we also are pushing to make certain that we focus on particular gangs and take out the leadership and do, to the extent possible, remove those gangs from particular neighborhoods. I think we've had some success in neighborhoods in Northern Virginia, for instance, and I know that the new assistant director in charge has as one of the mandates to work very closely with you to address that continuous phenomenon that we see there.
Okay. Well, okay. Hopefully we can continue the additional funding. I want to see us, again, if somebody's living in a poor neighborhood and they fear for their family, and I think some of the gang. What impact do you see the killings that took place in Mexico the other day of those that violence spreading across the border?
We've had pockets of violence spreading across the border, in particular when it's come to kidnappings, cross-border kidnappings. San Diego, El Paso, Juarez, San Diego, Tijuana, and we have task forces up in both of our cities to address that. This instance that occurred on Sunday, actually was Saturday afternoon, is something that we are working very closely with our Mexican counterparts to identify the persons responsible and assure that they see justice. I sent an inspector down to take charge of the combining the resources, not just the FBI, but DEA, ATF, and others who wish to participate to address that circumstance. This is the first instance we have seen, I believe, of individuals associated with the American consulate in Juarez attacked in such a brazen manner.
Did the car have a Texas license plate, a U.S. license plate? The car that...
I'm not certain whether it did or not.
That the people who were murdered were in. Was that an American car, American license?
I'd have to get back to you on that specific. But in one car, there were 2 individuals murdered. In another car, there was one individual was murdered. His family was actually in another car, but both of those cars had come from the same birthday party on that day.
Okay, but and I would be interested to know if there were U.S. license plates, embassy license plates, or Texas license plates. There are a number of other questions I'll ask on that. The radicalization issue. Over the last year or so, we've seen a disturbing trend of terror attacks planned and carried out by individuals, including Americans who've been radicalized, often through contact with violent Islamist influences. The Fort Hood killings, the Christmas Day bombing, now G.I. Jane and others, Mobley, the fellow the other day, Mobley. There have been reports in recent days of Americans being detained in Yemen, Pakistan, and other countries. Does this represent a significant shift in the terrorist threat facing the nation? And how is the FBI adjusting to counter these new developments?
I think those in the intelligence community, including ourselves, would say there has been a shift in the degree of concern about affiliates of al-Qaeda growing in strength and presenting a much enhanced a threat to the United States. And by that I'm talking, for certainly before September 11th, the Fatah, the federally administered tribal areas, Waziristan, western Pakistan, eastern Afghanistan has been the heartland of al-Qaeda and still presents a threat, as we saw with Najibullah Azazi, the individual from Denver who went back to New York and anticipated back in September attacking the New York subways. He was recruited and trained in Afghanistan. We also are concerned about Yemen, individuals, most in the last year and a half, individual Bledsoe, who was responsible for the Little Rock shootings of the military recruiters, one of whom died.
Did he have contact with al-Awlaki when he was in Yemen?
I believe he did. He was in Yemen at the time. He was in Yemen and then came back to the United States, but was radicalized in Yemen, and we do believe had contact with al-Awlaki. Abdul Muttalib originated in Yemen. We have a number of ties now with Yemen, and so Yemen is an issue as well as Somalia. And we've had a number of individuals from communities in the United States who have traveled to Somalia to train and to fight with al-Shabaab, and we have continuing concerns about that being exported back to the United States. So those are 3 focal points of our concerns overseas, and then we have, quite obviously, what we discussed before, homegrown terrorists who have been radicalized on the internet or otherwise.
Does it trouble you that there are 50,000 Americans living in Yemen today?
I think that is the case. Many of them are dual citizens, but I believe that it is that many.
And the Bureau is dealing with that insofar as...
Yes, we're working not just the Bureau, but in terms of identifying individuals who may have been radicalized in Yemen and want to come back to the United States and undertake terrorist attacks. We're attempting to identify those persons. We're also attempting to identify persons who are radicalized by al-Awlaki or others overseas, never traveled overseas, but have been radicalized to the point where they want to undertake terrorist attacks in the United States.
Okay.